I'm kind of an accidental Chicagoan. I'm from New York originally, and I moved to Chicago in 1983 during the campaign of Harold Washington. And, you know, it was this moment in time when you had this ugliness aside this beauty. You know, during the campaign, for those of you who may recall, there were many people in the city wore buttons with watermelons with slashes through them. When Mondale came to campaign for Washington, he was greeted with racial epithets. The campaign slogan for Washington's opponent was "Before it's too late." A not very subtle, I think, notion that we not elect a black mayor. And of course, yet the city rose to this occasion with this great coalition elected the city's first black mayor. And it was this great moment for celebration. And for me, I realized that moment for me encapsulated all that I love about the city, which it is, as you say, this place filled with contradictions. And I think the other thing about the city, and which is why I've stayed, is that I think you can find all the fissures in the American landscape within the confines of Chicago, whether it's the fissures over race, over class, the intersection of politics and money, on immigration. And for me as a storyteller, I can't think of a place I'd rather be.
What did reporting for There Are No Children Here teach you about the structural problems of poverty in Chicago, and how potentially has that changed in the 23 years since the book's been published?
I think the thing for me when I began working on There Are No Children Here, I grew up in New York City. I dropped out of college for a while. I worked at a settlement house on the south side of Atlanta. I thought I was pretty savvy when it came to urban poverty. And then I went and spent some time in the projects on the west side of Chicago. And I think for me, the first reaction I had was a sense of shame. And I was ashamed. Here I was in these projects that were literally just a mile and a half from my then office downtown. And I was ashamed that I had no idea what was taking place in amongst my neighbors. And I feel like this silence is what has hovered over this issue of poverty then and still today. And I think there's both this kind of institutional silence, the inability of institutions like the schools, the police, government to respond to what's become a weekly, if not daily, crisis in the lives of many of these kids. And also a kind of self-imposed silence. I think an unwillingness, if you will, on the part of people living in these communities to share their stories. And I think what I've come to realize over time is that much of that has to do out of fear that if they share their stories that somehow they won't be believed.